Hi, I'm Jim Hutchins, and this is the first in a series of videos that we're doing in conjunction with the Introduction to Neuroscience textbook. This is about the history of neuroscience, which I use in my classroom as a warm-up for the entire sweep of neuroscience rather than try to do the entire semester in course in one quick lecture. We divide it up into history of neuroscience, and that way we get an overview of the field of neuroscience and some of the current controversies in neuroscience, some that have been around for thousands of years. So in this first objective, I want to talk about the evidence that both the prehistoric peoples of Europe and that had writing systems, and then indigenous Americans that did not have a writing system, were independently aware of brain function. And so this is two completely separate groups of people, of course, until the conquest, when the Europeans came to what they came to call the Americas in the 15th and 16th century. So well before that time in Europe, but also in South America, we have evidence from Mesolithic cultures that are now in what's known as France and Switzerland. They're about 6,500 before the Common Era, so about 8,500 years ago, almost 10,000 years ago. So a little bit after the time when the indigenous peoples were populating the Americas, we believe. Then we have Stone Age sites, Middle Stone Age sites, Mesolithic sites, where we have evidence of trepanation. This is where a hole has been cut into the skull, and we'll talk about the reasons for that in just a second. Also, same sort of technique, or different technique, but same sort of outcome was used by the Incans from the area that's now Peru, and they were also successful in trepanning patients from about 2000 before the Common Era to about 1500. So this would be about 4,000 years ago. And probably we believe that these early surgeries were to increase the survivability of head trauma. So then as now, and this is a real extreme procedure, but we still do it in hospitals, especially in conjunction with an emergency admission. We'll cut a hole in the skull, do what's called a craniotomy to allow the brain to swell. If the brain is swelling uncontrollably, during that time when we can get a handle on the brain swelling, we cut a hole in the skull to allow the brain to not be damaged by the pressure that's increasing inside the head. So they were probably doing the same thing, not as well as we like to think we're doing it today, but certainly doing it, and there must have been some survivability because there's evidence that some of these wounds have healed. Another important thing, at least for me and my understanding of the history of neuroscience, is that it tells us that, contrary to popular belief, that Mesolithic humans almost 10,000 years ago certainly had a really good idea of how the brain worked. They knew what the brain was for. They weren't confused about the brain versus the heart being the place where you think. And that's a kind of a popular misconception. But certainly, why were they doing surgery here if they thought that the soul and somebody's mentation, somebody's ability to think was elsewhere? So it was hard for European surgeons who were just getting some quality techniques in the 19th century. Remember, we had to invent anesthesia first before we could really get into surgical technique. It used to be that speed was the only surgical technique you needed, just be fast to get it over with, because your patients were in constant pain while you were doing it. But with the advent of anesthesia, we were able to start to do surgeries, and so the 19th century European and American surgeons who were working so hard at their craft refused to believe that indigenous peoples, especially the peoples of the Americas, could possibly learn how to cut a hole in the skull without damaging the brain in the process. And yet Paul Broca, who's also famous for many other things, was able to demonstrate that. And that's what this illustration is from, is demonstrating different techniques for cutting a hole in the skull, different techniques for trepanation.